Tonight's lesson is Colossians Chapter 4. Colossians Chapter 4, the final chapter in this book. And sometimes when you get to the final chapters in books, they get a little bit talking about people and greetings and so on and so forth. And we see some of that in this chapter. So some of the verses maybe aren't as full of doctrinal things as we sometimes see in chapters like the last one, but they're important things. We can read about Christian people of long ago and see something about what they were going through, and know that these people that are mentioned, such as Onesimus, they're our brothers. We certainly should look to them as their example. The Bible is just full of them. One of them that comes to mind readily is Stephen in the book of Acts. We're not going to talk about him tonight, but these are people who are members of the church, our brothers in Christ. And like I said, we can look into their lives and see the things that they're going through and have compassion on them in many cases, or see the example that they've set and be motivated that we too can be faithful to Christ such as they were. So again, Colossians chapter 4, the final chapter, is our study for tonight. In the last of chapter 3 and the first part of chapter 4, it's giving some practical application and dedicating verbiage to family members, wives, children, husbands, and so on and so forth. We talked about that some last week, and talked about comparing it. If you want to hear more about the verbiage, more lengthy verbiage, if you will, you can go back to Ephesians chapter 5 and 6, and Paul there covers the same thing, but perhaps says more about it there than he does here. But in chapter 4, he starts off with masters. And again, at that day and time, most households, or at least some households, had bondservants or slaves within the household. And he's addressing the one that would be master. And for the most part, that would be the same one that would be categorized as the husband or the father. He would be the head of the household, including all of the kinfolk, blood kin, and also those who were servants or slaves, if you will. So the head of the family is also the head of the slaves. And the point he makes, and it's like the one he made back in Ephesians chapter 6, is, yeah, you're a master, you've accomplished something, you may even have some extra thoughts about yourself and how powerful you are, how strong you are, or whatnot, because you are one who has the master role. But what he wants to make sure is that you understand that you too have a master. All of us are subject to God himself. And masters, head of households, fathers, whoever you may be in that regard, realize that you report to God himself. Now there's going to come a day that you want God's favor. You want God's grace. You want God's mercy. You want entrance into heaven. There's a lot of things that you would desire to have come your way from God himself. So he says, make that same thought to those who are reporting to you. Treat them as you should. Treat them in a way that you expect to be treated at some future date, or perhaps even today, because we all want blessings every day from God. We all want rewards from God in the heavenly abode. So he's saying, consider that, understand that. You have a master, so walk in those kind of shoes. It's like other Bible concepts that we may come in contact with. For example, forgiveness. If you want to be forgiven, you need to be a forgiving person. If you want mercy, you need to be a merciful person. If you wanted to be treated good by your Heavenly Father when it comes time that you're asking Him for things, you need to treat those who are under you good as well. So I think it's the same kind of concept. We all need to understand our place in the pecking order, and that we are not the supreme boss. God is. And we shouldn't go around acting too big for our britches in that regard. And he goes on to say that there are things that you should give your bond servants, your ones who report to you. You should treat them justly. You should treat them fairly. And just and fair are not exactly the same thing. The Bible in many ways talks about being just and gives us example of just men. I'm going to give you one that you may not readily think of, and that would be Joseph in Matthew chapter 1, verse 19. Joseph is just finding out that his betrothed wife, Mary, is going to give birth to a child that's not his. He has a big decision to make. Is he going to make this public? Is he going to run off and leave her? What is he going to do? But it says that Joseph is a just man. And I'm going to suggest to you one of the things that means is that Joseph knew when to keep his mouth shut. And it would be good for all of us to learn when we should keep our mouth shut. He had the opportunity to go out in the community and say, well, I'm getting out of this situation. Here's Mary, and I don't know what she's done. This isn't my child that's getting born. He had the opportunity to run her down, run the situation down, but he didn't do that. It also suggests to us, I think, or a good lesson that we can learn, I think, is this. All of us have things that are private, and we should keep our private things private. We don't need to make private affairs public. And I think that's part of being a just person, that you learn to keep your mouth shut when you should, and you learn to keep your private affairs private. And in the case of a master and a servant, certainly that could be the case. If a master was afraid his slave was going to run away, he could go out in the middle of the town and talk about it, or he could belittle his servant, or talk to his friends about how he's not a very good servant at all. He could belittle him in a number of different ways. But being just means you don't do that kind of stuff. You treat people fairly. You don't run them down. You don't make public examples out of them. And just is one of the words he uses. The other is fair. We a lot of times say, nothing's fair. And I guess sometimes in our opinion we don't get treated fairly. But his direction to one who would have people serving under him is be fair to them. Give them what is due. If you've committed to take care of not only them but their family, do that. Be fair and stand up to the commitments and bargains that you have made. So again, I think if we look at this word just, there's a lot of different things that we can see from the examples we have in the Bible. There's just a few of them. It would be really good if we could just learn to keep our private affairs private and keep our mouth shut, and we ought to think that's part of what might be entertained here. But anyway, he's now discussed husbands and wives and children and servants, bond servants. So basically everybody in the nucleus or the nuclear family of that day and time. And those are things that are timeless. They are good advice for us today, how we should treat our wives or husbands, whichever we may have, how we should deal with our children. Now, we may not have bondservants in the way that they did back then, but the people that work for you, if you're an employer, any situation where you have people reporting to you, you need to make sure that you're being just, you're being fair. You never know when you might be teaching them about the goodness that's in Christ, and they might catch on. He continues to say, continue earnestly in prayer. So the things he says about prayer are these. Let your prayer be earnest. Be serious about it. Don't pray flippantly. Be serious about what you're praying for. Be vigilant. Another place we see that word used in the Bible is in our dealings with the devil. He tells us that we're to be vigilant because the devil's like a roaring lion, traipsing all over this world, seeking who he may devour. We need to be serious about our prayer life. And the other thing that he mentions is prayer needs to be with thanksgiving. We should always be thankful for the things that have come our way. If we're not thankful for the things that have already come our way, why should we expect God to send anything else our way? If you go back through the Bible and look for things that are common in prayer, I think being thankful is one of those things. Another of the things that's really prominent in prayers that we could study in particularly the Old Testament is there was always the putting God and His majesty first. Even in the prayer of example, our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Putting, again, the majesty, the greatness of God right up front. But in all the prayers that I can at least think of, there is the giving of thanks. We need to be thankful for what has come our way. So be earnest, be vigilant, pray with thanksgiving. And the other thing he says about prayer here is it's not just about you. We should pray for things concerning ourselves, obviously. Prayer of example, give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. There are things pertaining to us, but also in our prayer, we need to address the needs of other people. And he says specifically here that pray that there might be an open door for the word to spread. We always need to be concerned about God's kingdom and the growth and prosperity of God's kingdom. We need to pray that there be open doors for the gospel to be taught. So, practical application of how to put God in your life, do the things, and then pray. In verse 5, he says to walk in wisdom. Well, knowledge and wisdom aren't exactly the same thing. We know what knowledge is, and you can have a lot of knowledge and not do very much with it. But wisdom is the ability to put your knowledge to work. So he says, walk in wisdom. Put your knowledge to work, if you will. Over in the book of Ephesians, he was addressing the same thing. In there he said, walk circumspectly. Think of the decisions that you're making, the immediate impact, but think about tomorrow and the next day and down the road and other people. The decisions that you make affect a lot of other people, a lot of other things. Think about just beyond what's right at the end of your nose. Walk circumspectly. Both of them say this, that we should be redeeming the time. Some people would suggest to us that time is really all we got. We don't know how much time, but we do have the time of today while we're alive, and we need to be reckoning or redeeming the time. We need to be trading our time for something valuable, not just be flippant with it, not just waste it. We need to use our time for something valuable, redeeming the time. When I read that word redeeming, I always think about top value stamps. We'd save up those stamps, stick them in our little stamp book, and then it would come time we'd finally get enough that we would go to the stamp store and trade it in, redeem, if you will, buy something with those stamps. And that's what he's saying about our time. Redeem the time. Use it for something that's valuable. Talks about our speech, and speech is certainly important. We need to be of clean speech, so on and so forth. But he addresses some other things about it. He says, let your speech always be with grace. Well, that's a pretty high bar. We know what grace is. Grace is unmerited favor. So one of the things, I guess, one of the ways we could look at that is we need to be talking good and good things, even if good things about someone else is hard to find. We need to find those good things to say. Even if maybe they're undeserved, we need to find those good things to talk about. Now, I'm not saying lie. I'm not saying don't tell the truth. But we need to find good when we can and talk about good things when we can, so that we can be upbuilding, we can be edifying, we can be graceful in our speech. Need to kind of focus on that. He also says of our speech, it needs to be seasoned with salt. And that don't mean go in the kitchen and get the salt shaker off the table and, sprinkle it on your tongue. We know what he means with salt, because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus told us that ye are the salt of the earth. He says that in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. We are the ones that can go into the earth, go into the world, and flavor it, if you will. He goes on to say that if the salt loses its savor, if it loses its effectiveness, it's good for nothing. Good for nothing but to be trampled under the foot of men. He says it's not even fit to be thrown in the dunghill. It won't do any good even there. But we need to make sure that we are being the salt of the earth. If you lose your flavor, lose your effectiveness, basically we become good for nothing. And I think we can see or hear, I guess would be the right word, in our life, the things that we hear. There is a lot of speech out there that is good for nothing. A lot of people threaten other people. A lot of people are involved in filthy jokes and those kind of things. There's just a lot of speech out there that is good for nothing. You've probably heard this. I know I've heard it several times, that there's no such thing as a dumb question. Well, there is. You don't have to watch TV too long to see that. There are those people that question the president or other political people, and they'll ask them a question, and they'll answer it, and then they'll ask them the same question again, just a little different. They're trying to pry an answer out of them that they're going to catch them in some kind of error or something. There is such a thing as a dumb question, and a lot of reporters seem to want to just keep asking those. We need to be careful about our speech in all of those regards. And if we find that our speech is being good for nothing, we need to work on that. We need to change that. His suggestion here is that when it comes to speech, it would really be good if all Christians knew the Bible and knew how to answer questions that come our way. There are many questions that we might, if we were unlearned in Bible ways, say, well, this is my opinion. This is what I think about it. But what my opinion is and what I think about it is really secondary, is really non-consequential. What's really important is, what does God say? And when we have questions come our way that maybe people want to ask us, and they're hard questions because if we answered it, we'd have to point out that maybe they're living in sin or some of that, something like that. It would be good for us to know the Bible to the degree that we say, here's what God says about that. Homosexuality, here's what God says about that. Promiscuity, here's what God says about that. There are a lot of people out there who, unfortunately, over time have just answered the questions of, here's what I think, and people then go away and they say, well, my opinion is just as good as his, and in a lot of ways, I suppose that's true. But what's really important is, what does God have to say? In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, he says that we are to always be ready for defense of the gospel, to give a reason for the hope that is in you. Is that us? Can we defend while we're Christians? We should be able to. Can we give a reason for the hope that's living in us? Well, we should be able to. And Peter's suggestion is, that's really part of Christian life. We need to be able to do those things. Always be ready to give a defense, give a reason for the hope that is in you. He mentioned several different people here who are Christian brothers of his. He mentions Tychicus. He says that he is a beloved and faithful brother, and he has a job to do. And that is that he needs to give them the news about Paul. Christians of the age don't have the communications that we have, can't get on the phone, can't get on an airplane. They don't have all of that. They have word of mouth. And the Christian community is interested in Paul and his well-being and so forth. A lot of them were in congregations that were started by Paul, and they were always concerned about him. And he says that Tychicus has a job, and that's to give them news about Paul, how he's doing, to encourage them, to build them up. Onesimus also, he says, is faithful and beloved and has that same task. Aristarchus says that he is a fellow prisoner. Well, we read a little bit later down in verse 18, the last verse of this book, that Paul says that he's in chains. We know that he was in prison from time to time and so on and so forth. And when he writes this or authors it, he is in chains. But he says Aristarchus is a fellow prisoner, so he's also in chains. And if you go back to Acts chapter 19, verse 29, you read some of that story. They were both in Ephesus, and it says while they were there that the crowd seized Gaius and Aristarchus, who were Paul's traveling companions. So they're out there doing the work and doing nothing to be seized and imprisoned for, but that is part of the persecution that the church faced in the first century. Also talks of a Jesus whose name is also called Justice. He then says that all of these are fellow workers for the kingdom, and the only ones that he's aware of, I suppose, that are with him or close to him, that are of the circumcision. So they, in their prior life, were of the Jewish persuasion, but they've learned Christ and have turned, and there's a certain camaraderie they have with Paul, because we know that that's his past as well. Once a very zealous Jew, but has turned to Christ. And then there's Epaphras. Says that he is a bondservant of Christ. Says he labors fervently, praying for you, and he wants him to stand perfect and complete. And we talked about perfect Sunday. Does it mean complete? Well, in this verse, he's talking about somebody being perfect and complete. If they were the same thing, he would just say perfect or complete, but he needs to say both so that he gets the full meaning across. If perfect just meant complete, he wouldn't have to use an and there. But nonetheless, faithful people that need to be receiving the benefit of our prayers. It says to make sure you read this letter. You also let the Laodiceans read it. And the letter that went to the Laodiceans, you need to read that. So everybody who's a Christian is needing to learn about Christ as fully as they can, need to serve Christ as fully as they can. The more information we can get, the better off we are. And in our day and time, just to update a little bit, it's good for us to know what the letter to the Romans said. It's good for us to know what the letter to the Ephesians said. We can learn from all of those different things. It may have been addressed directly to them, but we can be benefactors of the things that were said. Take heed to the ministry. We need to focus on that. It's important. And we need to give it its due place in our life. We're all to be ambassadors. We're all to be ministers. You know, a minister and a preacher, that's not the same word. A minister is a servant. And we're all to be servants of Christ. We all can be used in the ministry of Christ. And he says, take heed to it. So in a nutshell, there's some thoughts about Colossians. Any thoughts, questions, comments? Be aware if you ask a question, I might use it Sunday.
So ring the bell.
Yes, ma'am.